Thank you all for coming. I think we'll get started. I'd like to welcome you to our 19th conversation in this series. I'm Dietrich Naumann. I'm the director of the John Nicholas Brown Center. And as you know, this series every Thursday night at 6 has two major goals, which is to bring artists, writers, thinkers, activists, musicians together with different publics for an exchange of ideas. And second, of course, we're eager to open up this house as much as possible. And one of the great concerns of any public humanities program are, of course, initiatives like what we are going to hear about tonight that aim at making the world a better, more inclusive, more just and welcoming place. And before I introduce our speaker, I want to thank Katharina Weigold, who is here in the first row. And she's a second-year student in American Studies here at Brown. She came, like me, from Germany, but much more recent, and from the city of Mainz. And we were in a class together, and she, as part of her practicum for a certificate in, or an MA in public humanities, rather, she worked with Vanessa and other groups and did a final project about social activism in Providence and groups like yours. And so I'm most grateful that you established the contact. And due to a lapse on my part, you were supposed to do the introduction. So the email misfired, so I'm doing my best. I'm sure you would do a much better job. So our speaker tonight is Vanessa Flores-Maldonado. She's a thinker, I would say, an activist, and she is currently the development director at the Providence Youth Student Movement called Prism. And just like a prism, light here gets focused on cases of need, of injustice, in areas where organization and activism can help. Vanessa went to Brown, graduating in 2014 with a concentration in science and society, and they have a track in health and medicine. And she took traditional biology courses, but also courses on race, gender, sexuality, and public health. And while at Brown, she already worked as a research assistant at the Taylor Laboratory and also at a childhood asthma research program in Hasbro's. And then after she had left Brown, she worked at the Boston Children's Hospital and the Beth Israel Deaconess Medical Center, developing all kinds of cool skills. I read in your CV about neurosurgical procedures on very small animals, mice, and so on, and wonderful. But you became also a very much beloved lab technician there that everyone wanted to work with. And since 2018, she is the development director at Prism, as I said, and she works out the grant applications and builds relationships with current and potentially future founders, donors, and community members. And the group gets engaged in many different ways in the social life of Providence, works on questions of immigration and deportation of immigrants. One of their programs is called Queer Transformative Roots. It serves queer and trans people of color in Providence. Another program is called Rhode Island Civic Engagement, or RICE. You have a knack for acronyms. Prism and RICE is very cool. In particular, helping members of the Southeast Asian refugee community. There's the Community Defense Program, CDP, educating Southeast Asian youth and youth of color about their rights when interacting with law enforcement. Similar for younger youth, organizing circle to help middle and high school youth in cases of disciplinary procedures at Providence Public Schools. And you have been very engaged in thinking about police reform, and you've secured funding, different grants for this work, hoping to pass the most progressive police reform legislation in the country, with the goal, obviously, of making our city safer for everybody. Very clearly, in a society like ours, without a reliable social safety net, it is organizations such as Prism and individuals such as Vanessa who are voices for change and often the key providers of help for community members in need. So please help me welcome Vanessa Flores-Maldonado.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. I hope the mic is good. Okay, great. Hi, my name is Vanessa. My pronouns are she, her, hers. That was a wonderful introduction, first of all. I've never been called a thinker, so I appreciate that. My role right now at Prism is helping young people figure out ways to fight back against systems that are continuously harming them. One of them being police, right? And so one small correction to your introduction was, I don't work for police reform, I work for police abolition. I come from a long line of people who have fought over and over again to make it clear that police do not keep us safe and have never kept us safe. Prism is, and this is our website, currently under construction. Prism has done a lot of work for the last 20 years. We celebrated our 20-year anniversary this past November, to really bring awareness around the issues of policing, and punishment, right? Because that exists in so many different ways in our communities that sometimes we don't even recognize. And so a lot of our work is centered on youth power, specifically youth of color. Because a lot of the times we find that youth of color are denied opportunities over and over again just based on their skin color, where they live, what language they speak. I know this because I grew up in LA, and I grew up in a community where nobody spoke English, but everybody knew who their local police officer was, right? We learned the tactics of police to keep ourselves safe. We knew that if they're doing a drunk driving stops, it's really to figure out if the drivers have their papers, otherwise they'd be deported. And there's things like this that I grew up with that were very much normalized, that I thought was natural to have a police officer in your school, to be treated like a criminal, to always be stopped by TSA. And it wasn't until I became involved with Prism where I learned, actually, this is not natural and this is not normal, because I'm sure that the kids at Wheeler don't know what's it like to be stopped and frisked like the kids at Hope High do. And so a lot of our work is centered around young people and giving them the power, the voice, the skills to be able to actually put their answers out there, because youth do have the answer. Youth do know what it's like and how to fight back when you have constant, primarily adults, telling them, no, you can't do this, no, that can't happen. A lot of the times, capitalism and white supremacy really strip away our imagination and our creativity, and we're told over and over again, this is the way that things must be done. And so a lot of what we try to do is actually fight back against that and give our folks the ability to dream, and dream big and huge. And so right here in this image, you have, this was a rally from 2013, I want to say. And you have Southeast Asian youth who were protesting because over and over again what we found was Southeast Asian youth were being stopped by police just for existing. And so our young people said, actually, no, this is not okay, and we want to fight back. And so I believe this was at the State House, in which there was a bill on police accountability and transparency in their policies, where you showed up and were saying, hey, I'm not a criminal, I am not a suspect, I am a young person who's trying to live their best life, but is constantly being denied that right to just live and exist. And so in this slide, you see some of our values. You know, Prism is often depicted as this angry, radical kid that's screaming, screw the police, which I do that. I do, you know, and I don't use the nicest words. But the founding of what we believe in is on the idea of peace and love and power, right? We want to see peace in our communities. We're tired of the violence. We're tired of suffering and having our dignity be denied over and over again to us. So we actually want safer spaces for ourselves where we can heal from the generations of trauma that have come before us, that has led us to where we are now. We work with Southeast Asian specifically because of the American War, or I guess here it's known as the Vietnam War, but it's more commonly known as the American War in Vietnam, that caused this massive influx of Southeast refugees to be displaced from their homelands and to be placed into these neighborhoods that were already over-policed, over-criminalized, lacked resources that they needed. And that's a very familiar story for me as someone who's Guatemalan, because that's what happened to my family. My mother is a refugee from Guatemala who was forced out of her home because of a civil war that was actually begun by the US government. And we see history repeating itself over and over again. Right now we see that with Afghan refugees whose government was just thrown away and I'm oversimplifying here, mostly because, it's a lot to go into, but whose government was also taken away and collapsed and destroyed by US interests. And so because we see history over and over again repeating ourselves, we have Southeast Asian refugees and their families, their youth, who are saying, actually, we don't want to see this repeating again and again. We want to create something new and different, somewhere where we can actually heal and have these conversations that are really important to us, but keep getting shut down. We believe in love, and that's like, I don't know if that makes us radical or whatnot, but we believe in loving each other and ourselves. We believe that just because someone has harmed our community, that doesn't mean that they can be thrown away. We believe that in order for our families, our communities, all of us to come together, we need to love each other and respect each other and understand each other and see each other for the basic human dignity that we have. And then power. And this is a really big one, right? Because especially in Providence, right, it does not escape me that I am not from Providence. I went to Brown University, an Ivy League institution that has a lot of power and continues to exert its power over the communities here in Providence, right? I have been here for about 12 years, and to see the landscape change so much because of Brown University and because of the power it continues to emphasize over not just here on College Hill, but the rest of the community in Providence and Rhode Island, that is real power that Brown University has, right? Because we are in this very fancy room with these portraits and the chandelier, right? This is power being displayed over us. And so what we believe at Prism is that we need to take this power that is no longer us and bring it back to our community, bring it back to our people. Because again, youth have the answers. They know what's up. And to keep telling them, actually, no, you don't have that power. Actually, no, you first need to get a college education in order to be validated. You must produce these reports and these data in order for your power, for your humanity to be validated. That's not what we're here for, right? So we really believe that we need to center the experiences of those who are directly impacted in this work. Right? I am directly impacted in this work because I know what it's like to have ICE burst into your apartment at 4 a.m. demanding to know where your family members are. I know what it's like to be pulled over by police, to be searched. I know what it's like to have my life be threatened by law enforcement. That is why I do this work. That is why a lot of us do this work at Prism, because we are directly impacted by the school to prison to deportation pipeline. And so to take people who are directly impacted and to put them in positions of leadership, to have them call the shots and to give them the power to make that change that they want to see, that is what we believe in. So these are our values. That's our old address, but the information is still the same. So I just want to run through some of our programs and dive into them a little bit more, right? So one of them being our Queer Transformative Roots program, which is a space that we've created specifically for queer and trans youth of color. And this is very important. As a queer woman, finding and learning and talking and just knowing another queer person growing up, not a thing at all. I come from an immigrant community where we believe that in order for our race to advance, we must behave a certain way, we must act a certain way, and homosexuality is not a part of that. And so we created a space at Prism specifically for queer and trans youth of color so that they can come and be themselves and feel like they are safe and they can be authentic to their core and to their values. A lot of our work within this program has been around housing, because this was, again, something that our youth were directly facing, where our youth were saying, hey, I'm sleeping in my car, I don't know where I'm gonna get my next meal, I got kicked out by my mom because I'm trans. And so our youth decided, you know what, we want to focus on housing. Because of the pandemic, this issue has only grown exponentially, where it is not safe for queer and trans youth to be home because their parents, their families, their neighbors don't accept them. So our goal with Queer Transformative Roots is to try to establish a rapid emergency shelter team where if a youth hits us up being like, hey, I got kicked out because I came out to my mom, we can immediately plug them into a home, a room, somewhere where they can feel safe, even if it's just for that night. And that makes a huge difference. And to be doing this work is paying homage to the roots of the movements that we're a part of, right? So we are an abolitionist organization. We are actively working to undo policing and punishment in our communities. Part of that is defunding the police, abolishing the police, abolishing ICE. And so, you know, this work that we do, a lot of us learned it from Black folks, we learned it from trans folks, we learned it from low-income folks, and that's important for us to always remember how our work intersects, how our work uplifts one another, how our work is always going to be in solidarity, because even though, you know, Prism is a Southeast Asian youth organization, we know that our struggle, our liberation is tied to the liberation of others. And so a lot of our work, yes, it's queer transformative roots, but we know that it has a bigger impact than just queer and trans youth of color. Our other program is RICE. We love acronyms. We have the best fun with acronyms. So RICE is a civic engagement program, and we're trying to twist the way that folks think about civic engagement. Because a lot of the folks that work with RICE are refugees who can't even vote, but they can be incarcerated. They can be deported. They have to pay taxes, but they can't vote. And so where is the just in that? Where, like, it blows my mind. And so what we're trying to do with RICE is, one, keep families together, right? Our families are falling apart because our men are being deported, and so women are being left behind to take care of the kids, to take care of the households, to get the income, to figure out ways to get their husbands, their partners, their boyfriends, their cousins, their brothers out of incarceration. And so our work is very much tied around keeping families together, around making sure that youth are not, because, I mean, ICE is violent, you know. To deport someone is violent. As someone who has had many family members deported, whose mother was undocumented for a while, that creates a lot of trauma. And so what we're trying to do with RICE is really help youth understand why is this even happening in the first place? A lot of the times it's a decades-old case, criminal conviction case that has now made someone eligible for deportation, but they served their time 10, 20 years ago and are now being deported. Under the current administration, deportation has only increased from the previous administration, from the administration before that, from the administration before that. For us, it doesn't matter who is in charge of this government, whether they're Democrat, Republican, Independent, Green Party, it does not matter. What matters most is what are the actions they are taking. Biden had said in the first 100 days, no one will be deported. That was a lie. What we are seeing is rampant deportations happening in Southeast Asian communities. Just this past month, there was raids happening across the country targeting Southeast Asians. And so what we hope to do with RICE is get refugees to engage with these political leaders who make these promises and keep them to their word. This is a big election year for Providence and for Rhode Island. Most of city council seats are up for grabs. The mayor's seat is up for grabs. The governor's seat is up for grabs. All of these politicians are promising us X, Y, and Z, and what we hope to do is hold them to their words and hold them accountable. Because too many times our folks have heard, we'll keep you safe, well, we won't do the thing, we won't call the cops, only to have them then chant fund the police, which that's not what we're asking for. So our other program, CDP, This is a program that started in 2016, and this is very much the heart, like one of the hearts of what Prism is about. We have a lot of hearts. We're like a cow that way. But this is one of our hearts. Organizing Circle is our other heart. And so CDP, what we do is we're not just trying to provide legal resources, we're also trying to provide organizing resources, and we're also trying to provide healing resources, right? The trauma of state violence is deep and runs deep. It is generational. It goes across all neighborhoods. And so what CDP is trying to do is make sure that community members know that they have a way to fight back, because too often we are told to just accept things the way they are. CDP said, actually, no. Our community can defend itself and create safe spaces and heal itself without the need of law enforcement, because again, law enforcement do not keep us safe. And so CDP has a long history of working with community members who have been abused, harassed, had their rights violated by Providence Police Department and other departments within Rhode Island, to provide them not just, here are your legal rights, here's how a court case works, but also here's how you organize a march, a protest, a rally, a petition, whatever form of direct action is needed, to make sure that people know what your story is. And so, CDP does a lot of work, and I can go on and on about them, but I think the main thing that CDP believes in is that every community member has a right to exist and to live without being criminalized or without being punished. CDP is like kind of the cornerstone of our abolition lens, and is really trying to help figure out ways in which we can keep each other safe without police or punishment. And then our biggest heart, Organizing Circle. So this is like the founding of Prism. This is the core belief of who we are, in which youth of color, again, should be given the leadership skills, the resources, whatever they need to see the harm in their communities and find ways to repair it. One of the biggest campaigns that OC has going on right now is a Counselors Not Cops campaign. So I don't know if y'all heard, but like a couple weeks ago, there was a student who was assaulted at Mount Pleasant. This student wasn't doing anything, not that it matters, but was, I don't remember the specific violence, but was basically assaulted by a police officer in the school and then arrested. His mother was not notified for hours. Another youth was arrested for trying to defend the original youth. And now this youth is being placed under house arrest, is now facing a court case, is separated from his friends, from his teachers, does not want to go back to school. So what Organizing Circle is about is finding ways to help youth heal from this trauma that exists not just in the streets, but also in their schools. Because this particular officer at Mount Pleasant has arrested 43 students since 2017. I went to school to learn, not to get arrested, right? I'm sure a lot of y'all went to school to learn, to grow, to become thinkers, to become writers, to become whatever. And so now this 16-year-old has been robbed of that chance and robbed of the opportunity because a police officer said, I am gonna bully this young person. A grown man, a grown adult said, this 16-year-old is violence, who wasn't even doing anything. And even if he was, this is a 16-year-old. So our youth right now are fighting for actual support systems in schools because police are not it, right? There is apparently one nurse that is shared between 2 high schools in Providence. Counselors are not a thing. Teachers are overworked, underpaid, there are limited resources for Providence Public School District, and with the state takeover, there is no power for local communities, local youth to actually be able to determine what is best for them. And so Counselors Not Cops is a campaign that our youth are undergoing to say, hey, we don't want police in school, we want counselors, like mental health resources, college guidance counselors. And then they came up with a comprehensive plan around how to go about and do so, and how to make it fiscally feasible to remove police and to put in more counselors into schools. It is amazing to see young people, when they are riled up, and they are ready to make change because they know they deserve better. And so I would definitely encourage y'all to, Google it, look up, Mount Pleasant, SRO, School Resource Officer is what they're called. I don't know why they're called the School Resource Officer, because they're not a resource, right? Instead, now youth don't want to go to school. And so with OC, with our youth programming, what we hope to really do is give youth the opportunity to dream big, to think big and to love big, because over and over again, they're being told, especially by adults, no, you cannot. So this is a photo. This is an old photo from 2018, but some of these staff members are still around. But a lot of us are youth. I'm no longer a youth. I unfortunately no longer qualify. I'm crying in my sleep. But the rest of the majority of our staff are young people of color who are ramped up and are ready to make the changes that they want to see in their communities. All of us have faced state violence in one way or another, and all of us are fed up and are ready to not just imagine and dream big, but also help others come along. So I'm glad that this is considered a conversation, because it very much is a conversation that we want to encourage folks to have over and over again with themselves, with their families, with their neighbors, around what is it that keeps us safe? How can we be safe without policing, without punishment? And if you're not directly impacted by these issues, how can you be moving, how can you be helping to support those who are directly impacted, right? So I'm gonna go back. Oh, this one. So this is our website. You can definitely go on there and donate and whatnot. It is under construction. We're a small staff with limited capacity, so the website has not been the biggest priority. But there is a lot of information on there, especially on our social medias, which is right here. You can see the tags and all that. But it is a great way for y'all, if you are looking for ways to get involved, to just know what's happening, right? Being on College Hill isolates and separates everyone on College Hill from the rest of Providence and Rhode Island. I know when I was an undergrad at Brown, I didn't know what was happening in Providence. I didn't know the ways in which Brown would at times contribute to the violence that's happening in our city. And so now, as an alum and as someone who has made Providence her home in so many ways, I want to make sure I'm encouraging others who are associated with this institution to find ways to engage with local community members, local organizations, and find ways to contribute to the work that's already happening. Because youth have the answers. They've come up with the plans. They've drawn the diagrams. They've gone through the scenarios. They know what they're talking about, and they just need adults to listen to them. I don't know where I am with time. I don't even know what time it is. But yes, so I want to thank you all so much for coming out and for listening, and please, follow our social media to learn more. Even if you can't donate, just knowing what's happening and having those conversations, I think, is very important. Ooh, thank you.
So would you take some questions?
Yes.
From the audience?
Oh my God, yes.
So I have a question. I wasn't aware that the Southeast Asian youth nationwide were suffering greater incarceration than other groups or being deported. I was wondering if you would elaborate on that in much greater detail.
Yeah.
When did it start? Why?
So when Southeast Asian refugees were displaced and moved to the United States, a lot of them were placed into neighborhoods that already had over-policing, over-criminalization, lack of resources. A lot of Southeast Asians were placed primarily in Black neighborhoods. So there's a lot of Southeast Asians in the South Side, in the West End, in Providence, and those are communities, neighborhoods that already had people of color who weren't given any resources. In particular with Southeast Asian youth, a lot of the times, because of the model minority myth, because the idea that Asian Americans will strive and excel, the issues that are particular to Southeast Asians are dismissed or swept under the rug. And I mean, this is a long history of colonialism and imperialism that I will not get into right now because we'll be here all night, all day, and I would like to go home at some point. But I think it is important to note the ways in which a lot of the times, because Southeast Asian, the Asian aspect is then distorted into believing that, well, all Asians, excel at math, or all Asians are doctors and are X, Y, and like these successful careers. That model minority myth is just so damaging to Southeast Asians, because instead of their unique issues being recognized and being taken into account, a lot of the times it's then like mushed into achievement rates of East Asians in particular. One bill that Prism worked on a couple years ago was a bill to disaggregate data. So when looking at students, for example, their students are just categorized under Asian American, and so what the Prism petitioned for was to have that data then be split up based on ethnicities, because that makes a significant difference. Because you have East Asians skewing that data, and so when you separate it out, you can see, okay, actually Southeast Asians are achieving lower rates of educational success because of where they were placed, in which neighborhoods they were placed in which schools they were forced to go to. I hope that made sense.
I think it's unfortunate that the term defund the police has become so popular, because it really only serves to give conservatives something to get hysterical about. When you really talk to somebody about the issue, it turns out what they're really talking about is redirecting the funding, so that instead of buying them a bunch of new weapons, they're maybe getting like a bunch of social workers to come with them to go on a call, where they might be much more effective than the police who don't have the training that they need. So in a way, I feel like defund the police is misleading, and it really should be something like refund the police, or somehow something that says we want to just re-channel the money into something that's better than what it's being spent on now. Defund seems like it's like, oh my God, let's not tear everything down, and the Fox News just go crazy over it,
Yeah.
So I don't know. It just doesn't seem to be the right. Sometimes we just don't find the right term.
And that's very difficult, because especially after the Trump administration, we see media engaging in these quick, snappy, 5-second ways that are designed to mislead folks, right? Because defund the police is not the full statement. The full statement is defund the police to invest in our communities, right? We're not asking for defunding the police to happen overnight, because that's not feasible at all. What we want instead is there for it to be a long thought out process of ways in which, first of all, problem police officers who are continuously abusing our community members need to be fired, and instead those monies, those resources be invested in social workers, in counselors, in EMT, in firefighters, right? Into the actual services that our community needs. Because when you look at data around 911 calls, it's not people calling in because there's gunshots or there is a highly violent crime happening. It is, hey, I'm worried about my neighbor. Hey, the music's playing too loud. They cause issues that instead could be, you can have de-escalators come in, folks who do conflict resolution come in, so that instead of it exploding and becoming this giant thing, maybe just a conversation needs to happen, right? And so a lot of the times defund the police is tricky, because yes, I would love to defund the Providence Police Department of the $88 million that it gets every year, because I know that what our community members need is actually more programs for youth, is actually green spaces for our youth to go out and play in, is actually schools that have more than one nurse. So defund the police is an incomplete statement, because the full statement has to be that we need to invest in our communities, particularly Black communities, because those are the communities that have been the most affected by policing and punishment in this country.
Well, thank you. It's the first time I've heard the full statement. Really? I've never heard
Yeah.
the whole complete statement as what you.
And so that's why you need to have
Yeah,
these conversations,
yeah.
especially with abolitionists who we want to talk about. Some of us don't want to. Some of us are tired. There are days when I'm tired and I just don't want to talk about it. But when we want to have these conversations, we just want to imagine and dream big. Yes.
Two questions. One is, how is your organization funded? And the second one is, can you give an example where your organization has actually successfully affected change for improving the health of the community?
We are funded donations. Community members donate a lot to us, especially after summer of 2020 with George Floyd, with Breonna Taylor, with Ahmed, with so many Black folks being murdered by police. Community members knew our work and knew our value, and so they donated to us. We also are donated by private foundations. Every now and then, Rhode Island government likes to throw us a little bit of funding, but for the most part, we are funded by community members and by private foundations. As for solid way that we've created change, I mean, we've had community members who were supposed to be deported, and we fought for their release. And that makes a huge difference, because it gives hope to a lot of other folks. Currently, we are helping out about 50 families who have one member who has orders of deportation. And so just keeping that family unit together has made a huge difference, because it's inspired. Rhode Island is very small. New England is very small. And so when you have one victory, word gets out, and it helps people see, actually, I do have a fighting chance. I just need someone to listen to me. Yes?
It also seems that maybe what we should all be aiming for is getting community involved.
Mm-hmm.
And, I fully agree that the police are wrong sometimes, but the police have a function, and somehow, after all, the policeman is the person who helps, or should help, diffuse arguments that are between neighbors or between a family or something. In other words, they should be a calming influence.
Right.
But if you look at a policeman, he looks like a commando almost, with all the guns and,
Yeah.
the kit that he's wearing isn't a friendly kit.
Mm-hmm.
So somehow, I'm very much a believer in community policing, but policing's the wrong word, whatever it is. And that's what we need to find, is a new word. Because you can't say just social worker,
Mm-hmm.
or whatever. We have to maybe change the meaning of a word like police, and that's what these people do.
Yeah, I think, you are touching on so many points there. I think getting community to be the ones involved in leading this work is very difficult. For Prism, right, we are directly impacted by this work, meaning sometimes we got to go bail out our family members while we're also trying to get the police defunded, right? And so sometimes it is a lot to ask community members to do the work, especially because this work is not glamorous. It's not paid very well. It is very limiting, and it is very emotionally draining. So there are limitations when it comes to asking community members to do the work, because they are being impacted in real time, especially under this pandemic. We've seen a lot of our community members just be unable to do the work because they have to figure out how to get a job, how to, et cetera, et cetera. As for the word policing, there's a long, nasty history when it comes to police, right? Originating to slavery, the first police force in Rhode Island being created to suppress workers and worker rights up in Pawtucket. If y'all haven't gone to Slater Mill, that's a great time. And so it's important to acknowledge this long, abusive, toxic history that comes with this institution, right? We do need a way to keep each other safe, because as much as I want to believe that everyone is good and gracious and pure, that's not the reality of things. So we acknowledge, and this is why we're saying abolition is not overnight. Defunding is not overnight. It has to be a long-term strategy, because we need to figure out ways to keep each other safe after the fact. And so we need to come up with a different word, a different term, but
in some ways it's more than that, because if you're standing on Benefit Street, only picking on it because that's where we are, there are 3 police forces, aren't there? There's the Providence Police, the Brown Police, and the RISD Police.
it's a lot of police.
Yeah.
Huh?
That's a lot of police.
Right? You know, my children live in Washington, D.C., and I think the last time I checked, there are 22 different police forces in one of the smallest governmental institutions. You know, we talk about Rhode Island being small. District of Columbia, you know,
22 different
it's
police
X
forces.
square miles,
Yeah.
and there are 20-some police forces in there.
Yep. Who
So,
has no statehood, and is
Huh?
that a coincidence that it has a large black population, and there's 22 police forces?
yeah,
And so it's like that money, you know, we're in a housing crisis.
I know. So you know, we need to reform it somehow. And,
Change does need to happen, yeah.
you know, we shouldn't be afraid of the police. They should be helping us.
They are public servants, right? That's the main word. Police are public servants. And so when a public servant continues to harass you, continues to abuse your rights, right? If somebody fails to do their job, they should be held accountable. And if they continue to not do their job, they should be fired. But what we're seeing instead is that these people are being protected over and over and over again. Rhode Island is one of 11 or 13 states that has the Law Enforcement Officer Bill of Rights, where it is virtually impossible to fire a police officer. If George Floyd had happened in Rhode Island, that officer, nothing would have happened to him. And so this is where abolition comes in, where if someone is not doing their job, and it is in fact costing people their lives, they should be fired. Because why would I continue to employ someone who is literally killing people? So it is a long and the word police is very long and complicated, and it has a history that we need to acknowledge, and that's the very beginning of what it means to be doing this work.
But we need to find, I mean, defunding almost sounds negative, if you see what I mean. We need to find a positive vocabulary to say, how can we make our public servants do a better job for the public?
Exactly. The public servants are supposed to serve the public. Police is currently not serving the public.
Yeah.
I'm going to move on to you, and then there was a question in the back. Yes.
2 nights ago, I was sitting in my car in the middle of Chinatown waiting for my pickup order. We had ordered some food. And hustling, bustle, little intersection. And all of a sudden, 5 elderly people dressed in little vests, in like luminescent vests, showed up at this corner. And they all said community watch on their, and it looked like they were organized, and all of a sudden you felt, okay, these people are going out and they kind of spread out from this one spot, and I felt, you know, you feel good, you feel like they care, and someone must have organized them, someone must have them on a rotation every night, and it makes a big difference.
Absolutely.
The difference of community pattern. I mean, yeah.
And they were all, I would say, older than 65, 70.
Yeah. Elders are important to our work, critical to our work, yeah. Yeah, that is what we're trying to do here, is trying to find other ways to keep each other safe that's not just a gun. Yes, you had a question for that?
Are there any models to follow where cities, have successfully defunded the police, and how's that working?
In the United States, as far as I know, no. There has been, I guess technically yes, because there have been places in which police budgets have decreased and have instead been invested elsewhere. I am thinking specifically, there's cahoots in Oregon. That was a big buzz phrase that was happening when 2020 happened, where instead of it being armed police officers coming in to respond to a crisis, it was trained mental health professionals who would come in and diffuse, de-escalate, whatever needed to happen. I think one of the big things that defunding the police is also advocating for is that, when we look at 911 calls, when we look at why people even call, not police, but 911 specifically, it is for a mental health, it is for health-related situations. And so I think Austin, Texas also might have been able to defund, and I know that Madison, Wisconsin has done some pretty amazing work, but it hasn't been a full defunding of the entire police department. That is something that I will always advocate. It has to take time, right? Because you need everyone to be on board with that process, but also we need to make sure that we have actual safeguards in place for when there is that rare crime that happens. One of the things with the media is that a lot of times you hear, well, crime is on the rise, crime is on the rise. Well, actually, that's not what's happening. We're seeing violent crime go down, but there are people who need resources, right? Why does someone rob a store? What is the root cause of these issues? Why does someone, attack someone else? Why does someone steal from someone something else? What we need to be looking at is really like, what are the root issues to be able to resolve the crime on the rise that's allegedly happening, even though it really isn't. But I don't know of many cities that have done I don't know of any cities that have done a full defunding, but there has been partial, little by little happening.
Maybe I could throw in, just since I'm from Germany and I hear a little British accent, maybe, that there are completely different models out there of policing without guns, or Germany is totally different from America, and both countries have a tiny fraction of the incarceration rate that we have in this country, right? So there are models out there, perhaps not in this country, but there are international models out there worth studying where things work really well under different contexts.
Oh, I would love to study that, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I come from Spain, and interesting debate is happening there in the field of architecture, but also outside, about the role of prisons. People should be constructed for a new era, or if they should be used at all. And I think you mentioned it at some point, but I would like you to hear some other thoughts on what alternatives are there for the prison centers as we don't know them today.
Yeah. Oh, prisons is just the complete stripping of someone's humanity. I say this as someone who has never been incarcerated, but who does know a lot of folks who, and my family, of course, has been incarcerated. But I think the way in which incarceration in the United States, and this is my area of focus, is the United States. So the international perspective is very much welcomed because we can learn. But I think in the United States, prisons have become a way of kind of tossing people aside and saying, no, you're bad, so I'm going to stick you in this corner, strip you of your humanity, strip you of everything as a way to reform you. It does not work. And instead, what it does is break down a person and break down their humanity in ways that, it is a human rights violation in this country, the way that prisons operate. For example, you have a detention center up in Central Falls called the Wyatt Detention Center that community members have long been trying to get closed. There have been deaths in that detention center. People have died because of lack of medical support. currently there is an outbreak of COVID-19, and so you have community members who are in these places who are being denied basic healthcare access, basic drinking water. You see this happening down at the Adult Correctional Institute in Cranston, in which there is mold. There is the water is not clean. I don't know about food being okay. I don't know, like, you know, it's not. Humans have a basic dignity, a basic right that we all deserve, and prison strips that away. And a lot of the times what you see is a lot of folks who went through the court systems who didn't know the rights and then ended up being incarcerated, even though they actually had a fighting chance. You have a lot of situations in which people are being accused of a crime, and then, you know, whether or not they did it, automatically placed into prison because of who they are, where they live, what their skin color is. But instead of there being actual work to help address, again, the root cause of why this issue happened in the first place, what we see is punishment. Punishment does not work for our communities. It does not help us be better versions of ourselves. Instead, what it does is make us feel like, okay, well, if all you see me is as a criminal, I'm just going to be a criminal. And so, you know, I know that there's other countries in which they have a different prison system, and I do not like saying that, but I know that there are countries in which the idea is, you know, you have space to be, you have space to exist, you have access to resources, access to air and greenery, which a lot of the times in the United States prisons, you don't even have that basic access. That instead encourage a person to do that internal work to figure out, okay, why did I do this crime? What was my reasoning? What was my drive, right? Humans are not perfect by any means. We are flawed, we can be cruel, but we can also be loving. And so a lot of the times prisons just boil a person down to that cruelty and nothing else, instead of, hey, let's examine what's going on here. Let's figure this out. Let's have a conversation about why did you do this, and that landed you in this situation in the first place. And so at Prism, we don't believe in just throwing our people away, because that is what the prison industrial complex is literally throwing a human being away in the trash. That's not it. That's not how we create a better society. So a lot of the times when I talk about I want alternatives to this, I want alternatives to that, people are like, well, what do you want then? And it's like, well, I haven't had a chance to build and imagine and dream that out, because right now I have to fight for the humanity of my people. But if we give folks the opportunity to dream and build and imagine, then we can find better alternatives to these things. But it's just, you know, it's being directly impacted means that, yeah, I want to think about prison alternatives, but also I got to go bail someone out, and then I got to go deal with this mental health crisis, and then I got to figure out how to feed this family of 5. So this is where the imagination and the creativity really comes in, so that we can have these questions, answer these questions in ways that are more thought out.
All right, before I thank our speaker, I'd like to invite you to join us in the music room where we can talk. I think you have about half an hour before you have a Zoom call, right? So we can talk some more with Vanessa, but let me just say that you're an amazing speaker and very inspiring, and this was exactly what I hoped would happen. And we'd all think about something in a different way, inspired by what you presented, and that was really quite wonderful. Thank you for coming, Vanessa.
Thank you all.